Hi, everybody. Welcome in. Welcome. I have this song playing called In My Heart. I was telling Brian before we started this that I think talking about recruitment still brings up a lot for me. Um, I've been the token hire for quite a bit of organizations. And y'all who are rolling with me here in this conversation, you can see my degrees. And if you get a chance to talk to me one on one, you know that I'm very talented at what I do. Um, but there's been this layer where I know I'm being hired as the token candidate, and there's times where I go in because it's aligned with my strategic goals of what I want to do in my own life. So I'm like, okay, I'll play ball and then I will go in as the company needs me to. But it's important that I want to be able to have this conversation from a very real perspective because to have anybody come in your organization and be the first of anything is very difficult. It is lonely, and it can also be very painful depending on the environment they're walking into. I've had the fortunate opportunity as I've gone in as under the token cloak, so to speak. I've had the opportunity to really make an impact in company cultures, and this is part of the reason that we started Fears Advantages. I know what it's like on multiple sides of this conversation. So we're talking about recruiting. I just wanted to start there and welcome you all into a conversation that's been important to me, and I'm glad that we're having it more and more. And just on the big picture, we'll also show you how it's connected to many other facets of your organization. Because if you're experiencing a recruiting issue, I promise you right now, it's not just a recruiting issue. There's multiple facets, which is why we started doing this work as a DEI operating system and figuring out what are the gaps. So we're going to focus on recruiting for this session here. Welcome in, and let's start getting some of those questions. So we'll answer some questions that have been submitted via email, and then as you're listening along, you can also submit your questions again via the Q&A or by raising your hand, and we can promote you to a panelist. So let's dive in. Thanks for hearing me. So the question that sparked this, we got this question, I don't know, Brian, like maybe like 10, 15 times over the last month of how do I diversify my pipeline? And if you, I did a more extended video of this just, yesterday, and we sent it out so we can send you that replay as well. So how do I diversify my pipeline? And the question I ask in return is, how do you define diversity? And usually people will sit back and like, that's a good question. I'm like, dang, that sucks. If you haven't defined that yet, diversifying your pipeline is not even possible because you're now it's just this vague idea. I think people, if some of y'all have seen us share this diagram before, it comes from the United Way of Asheville, and they're sharing a couple of different intersections. And I say a couple different because this could be even bigger chart, but some people right now are trying to diversify simply by race. And they're like, okay, and I would count that as visual diversity, right? So if you, for example, I get this all the time. Yeah, man, if somebody looks at our current About Us page, you're just going to see a lot of people who look similar. So what they're communicating to me, whether they realize or not, they're trying to get visual diversity. So when you go through and scroll through our page, you will see a bunch of different types of folks who are on our page, which I guess means to them that we are diverse. And again, that's one version. Back to here, right? That visual diversity would be one. I mean, this ring here on the this, and notice even visual diversity is only a couple of things that you might be able to see, including possibly age and sex. However, there's a lot more of diversity that's not visual. So when I'm asking people like, what do they mean by diversity? I would want them to understand all these different intersections, not necessarily to have a master's degree in intersections of human beings, but to really clarify what do they mean by diverse. One version that folks have been talking about is underrepresented groups. So we want to have, by increasing our diversity, we want to have an increase of underrepresented groups. And as they're talking about that, they're getting more clear that, okay, we may have, we might even already have visual diversity, but there's some underrepresented groups. There's some groups who are very close to our customer groups, and they're not represented in our organization. So when we start to define diversity aligned with your organization, your clientele, and your strategic goals, that already starts to give people a better understanding of how or of what they mean by diversity, which starts to lead us to then the how, right? So the bigger question here we're answering is, how do I diversify my pipeline? So first of all, if you're listening to this, please, please, please define what you mean, what your organization means by diversity, and do it in a way that you can actually then communicate to other people, right? So we'll pause it there for that portion. And then as we look at diversifying the pipeline, so for example, when folks have been talking to me lately about visual diversity, I just got off of a call recently, like, very recently, like today, where they were saying, about 40% of our clients are, people essentially of Black skin color, right? And that if you followed our other presentations, we talk about Black skin color, but, I'm Haitian, I'm American Haitian, there's American Jamaican, American Black, or there's all these different like layers of what a Black skin color could mean culturally, right? So they're saying in this example, 40% of their clientele is of Black skin color. So like, but we have no one in our staff or on our board who's of Black skin color. And so they were telling me this, right? And it's very interesting that for them already, they already see the business case, which we'll talk about in a moment, but they're already seeing that, okay, even if our clients look at our organization, they won't see themselves in it. So why should they be our clients? So we're talking about diversifying, going back to diversifying their pipeline and how they define diversity, they're also defining it in regards to their client base. And now, as we start to talk about how they diversify, it's interesting for me to ask them, how are they building trust with those folks, being their clients in this example, and potential employees who are Black skin color? And again, I'm just talking about Black skin color in this example because that's the one I just had earlier today. And what's interesting is I asked them about how they're building trust. We got down to this portion where even though they were serving their clients well and they had lots of happy and positive experiences, there were still miscommunications about their relationship with clients. And even in serving their clients, there's miscommunication. So imagine these are your paying clients and there's miscommunication. Imagine when you're talking essentially to strangers. Recruitment, you're really talking to strangers. And if there's miscommunication with your client base about what you do and why you may not be as diverse as they are, what are you doing to close those communication gaps with random strangers who you're trying to hire? We're still trying to answer this question of, how do I diversify my recruitment pipeline? How do you build trust with the folks who you're trying to recruit into your organization? And we're just going to keep rolling on this topic because I think this is answering a lot of the same questions that we've been getting. Is when you're starting to build trust with those folks, are you, so part of that building trust, right? We'll look at the diversifying your pipeline, including even as down to your the posts that you're making, like the job posts. Where are you posting those job posts? Or how you're reviewing people's resumes? What interview questions you're asking? Like, we can go this whole process, right? We'll talk to you about if you want us to be a part of reviewing your recruitment process. We're happy to help in doing so. What's interesting when we're talking about building trust with folks, and this client was awesome because they're being honest. I say they're awesome because they were being honest with me, right? I appreciate honesty. If we're talking about this and we're not being honest, there's no way we're going to build trust. So I appreciate honesty over all of it. So I will tell you that there's a difference between making a mistake and being racist. There's a difference between making a mistake and being racist. Because I told this client, we're going to make mistakes. Even if you work with us, there's still going to be some things we need to figure out with your industry, with your target market, with your customers as part of this recruitment process. So there might be mistakes along the way. Not even might, there will be mistakes along the way. But as we build trust, we give each other the benefit of trust. So that becomes a buffer. So people don't automatically call you racist. But there's a difference between making a mistake and being racist. There's a difference between trying and not trying and avoiding. So for those who are actually trying, those are the folks that I want to work with. We don't work with people just giving lip service. So that's going back to the honesty. If people are honest with me, I know they're not just giving it lip service. They're truly wanting to make a change. So for those of you who are here, you can type the word honest in the chat. If you're like, all right, I want to be honest about this process, not a shame and blame process, just an honest process. So as we're diving into this here, and um, we're talking about how they're building trust. It came down to this conversation of, are they guessing or engaging? Right? So when they're even as you are thinking through what qualifications to list or where to go as you're doing your recruitment events, are you actually engaging people from the community you're seeking to recruit, especially if you have customers in that community? Right? Do you have enough of a relationship to ask them as opposed to just guessing? I'll tell you, I prefer to engage instead of guess, because guessing leads to more mistakes and more hardship, more frustration. Engaging means like, hey, I can ask you. Hey, we'd like to make sure that, and when we talk about asking, part of that engaging, what kind of questions are we asking? So this will be that portion of what questions can I ask to diversify my pipeline? So when you're making a statement, because the other part, there's so many pieces. I'm trying to keep it like focused, but you can tell like how many questions we've been asked, and this is why we're doing this session. So what's interesting is when people say like, okay, what questions can I ask? I'm like, what statements are you saying first, right? Because sometimes people want to hide. So they're like, hey, our about us page isn't diverse. Should I hide that? It's like, no, that's not honest. So we want you to be truthful here. For example, you might say on your about us page, our organization is committed to diversifying in order to serve the client base that we serve, and to be able, and we are actively working to increase the diversity within our organization as a whole. And you might put, in caveat. So as you may not see this represented on our about page, please know that we're working on this behind the scenes. Even as I will go through pages and I see things like that, that lets me know that you're putting a public statement, you're calling out what is and what is not in your organization, and then telling people that you're actively working towards it. So if you're having statements like that, and you can also put those things into your postings, right? Because if you're already concerned that people are going to see a lack of diversity, you might as well call it what it is, call it out. It's always better to address an objection before somebody else brings it up. So call it what it is, even when you're putting your job post or even as you were putting it on your website. So that way, when you reach out to folks for feedback, you can say, hey, we are in this process of diversifying our team. And again, we want to align it with our current client base and also what we believe our future client base will look like. And can you give us some feedback on this job posting? Man, people love to share their expertise. If you ask the right people, and when I say the right people who understand how to give feedback on a job post, right? I'm not going to just flag down random people. Hey, tell me about this job post, right? That's not. I want you to be strategic in who you're asking. You can ask us, for example, but you can also ask other colleagues. And if you, I'll pause for that for a moment, but you can ask other colleagues and people who you trust to give you feedback on this. And again, know that one of the greatest ways to test it is to put it out there into the marketplace, see the response that you get, and then revamp it. I was mentioning to Brian before we got on this call, there's certainly a layer here of that there has been that your recruiting process may have been happening by default. Not even that there's a layer here that the recruitment process has been happening by default. And for some people, recruitment has been a priority, but it's been a low priority. Now, with the increase of racial tension, recruitment is a higher priority. And I will appreciate that it's a higher priority. I will not appreciate, though, that there's sometimes a sense of entitlement that, hey, we made a post and we're now accepting more diverse candidates. How come they're not applying? Well, how come you haven't been accepting them until now? This is where we go back to building trust with diverse communities. This will take time. tell you right now, this will take time. So as we're still talking about this bigger question of how do I diversify my pipeline, we've already covered, we're talking about you define diversity and looking at this bigger question, how do you build how do you build relationships with a diverse group of candidates? May also start with you building a relationship with a diverse group of your clients so we can ask them for feedback, but also ask them for help in reaching out to the very community that you're seeking to connect with. And as you're going about doing that, it's important to acknowledge where you currently are. And I will ask you to publicly acknowledge it, and publicly being like on your own page. You don't have to shout out on random social media platforms, but if you know when on your job posting and on your website, people are going to be looking for diversity or pointing out the lack of visual diversity, it's important that you might as well call it out first and do it in a way that allows you to really guide the narrative towards increasing diversity and improving your relationship with diverse communities. Now, the other question that comes up quite often is how do I get my, for example, leadership or other team members on board? Because again, if your recruitment is just an extension of your organization, um, and oftentimes people are finding that they might get some lip service from folks who are leadership or folks who are in other hiring or managing positions, and that say, yeah, we want more diverse candidates, but then when there's an actual request for more resources to outreach to diverse communities, or when there's a request to extend the hiring period to find more diverse candidates, those same people who are saying, yeah, we support this, are like pushing back and kind of shutting down the process. So as you with the bigger question of how do we get buy-in from especially our leadership, but also other team members, I think one, it goes back to again, how do you define diversity? And two, what is their understanding of how these diverse candidates are going to impact your organization? We were looking at some of the research that talks about what employees want to know when they're being hired. They want to know what their role is in the organization, how they fit. How do I fit into your organization, your strategic goals? Are you answering that question beforehand with your team? And it's important that if you're doing any recruiting, have you, when you have these gaps of skills and you have these gaps of even responsibilities or bandwidth, are you first looking at how you are honoring the diversity that's currently in your organization and structuring your team to best support your current needs before bringing other people in? I will tell you, one of the best ways to recruit is from the inside, in the sense of that people already know your organization and you can be grooming them. But the flip side of this is oftentimes we're seeing recruitment processes happen independently from team culture and team diversity, team inclusion conversations. So people honestly feel like, hey, I got passed up for this job, even though it's right here. And that is going to decrease trust inside your organization. And what's even worse than that is all of a sudden your diverse hire becomes part of the problem. It's like, how am I the problem? I just got here. Part of the problem was the way that the organization was structured to begin with, and that there was less communication internally in terms of how, for example, my presence would be contributing to the team, but also how the team is operating currently and who can fill what gaps. Because when there's actually true gaps that are acknowledged that no one can fill, or great, we're going to hire this position because we have this gap and we've checked internally, we've taken care of our people internally. Now, as we bring in a diverse hire, there's more buy-in because that person is filling a role that we cannot currently fill. And that way, that person's not being embroiled in inner politics and inner frustration before they even get a chance to do what you hired them to do. It's important that you're considering in your recruitment process, what are you doing to honor the diversity in your team currently, to ensure that you, with your current folks, you've taken care of what you can take care of. So you truly identify the gaps and allow those gaps to be what helps to create buy-in. So when you're hiring in new candidates, especially diverse candidates or underrepresented candidates, they know where they fit in, and so does everybody else. So that way, y'all can grow together. Mhm. And then, so I see you, Brian. Thanks, Brian. And I appreciate the comments and so on that are coming through. And this is an interesting piece again about diversifying the pipeline. Folks are asking, how do I get more candidates in to my pipeline, or how do I get more candidates to apply to my job? um, all these questions are complex, right? So we generally, again, we always say assess before we make a mess. So I would love to even ask you, if you have the ability to, can you track 3 years, 2 years, even one previous year of your recruiting to see how much diverse folks you had apply? Like let's actually see if there was applicants. Okay, where did they get dropped off in the process? Where did they get blocked in the process? Because you may actually be getting people to apply, but they're getting blocked in the process, right? So that's one conversation we can have. The other conversation is, where are you going to, where are you posting, where are you positioning yourself, where are you, how are you building a brand for your company in a space of both active and people who are actively looking for jobs and people who are passively looking for jobs? Like passively looking for jobs, being like, oh yeah, I would love to find a better job, but I'm not going to leave right now. Those people are passive versus people who are actively going to like Upwork and Indeed and looking for job postings. So what are you doing for both of those folks? What are you doing to, again, to establish yourself as a company that people want to work for? And I'll tell you, if you want to do that, you like start with the people who actually work for you, because they're going to be huge advocates for you. Like if you can get those people to love your company, they also become part of this idea of helping you recruit. They grow your recruitment task force because they are being advocates for your company. So this is an awesome place to work. That happens to me all the time when folks will ask me, hey, Kimmy, can you have a recommendation? We're trying to fill this role. It's like, yeah, if I've worked with your company before, I'm happy to pass it along. If I'm like, no, the person's not going to be safe, I wouldn't pass that information along. So just know that your internal people can be one touch point, and your job posting can be another touch point. Going to recruiting events can be another touch point. But you might also have to have multiple versions of those touch points. And this is all getting to answer the question of how do we get more people? I would say, how do you increase your, essentially your marketing of this job that you have? In marketing, there's something called the rule of seven that says, and this is a marketing term. This is something that I think also helps people wrap their head around DEI. That essentially says when someone's going to make a decision, they need to see the thing. They need to be offered the thing 7 times before they make a decision. Now, we're just talking about recruiting, but I can look at just DEI as a whole. Some people say, yeah, we just talk about DEI. Like, how many times have you talked about it? Well, we keep talking about different things. Well, that means you might only be talking about a change one time. Just going on the rule of seven, you would have to talk about that same change and different facets of that same change, different obstacles and objectives around that same change at least 7 times for people to finally get on board with it and keep going. So it's just a conversation about DEI. We can talk about that later. But for recruitment, are you using the rule of seven? And we are in the process of hiring, and I'll share a couple of notes about this. But one of the things is, we posted several times on Upwork, for example, and making sure that we can allow candidates to see our posts at different times, at different times for people in different time zones, but also different days for folks who are looking, because everybody's on different work schedules. And are we willing to post multiple times? Like, I'm humble enough to be like, yeah, there's so much competition out there. Can we use this rule of seven to make sure that we're out there plenty of times and we're inviting people, we're making several touch points with every candidate that we want to connect with? And then even, are we going to other platforms as well? And we can talk about that in a moment, but this idea, are we going to other platforms? Are we willing to give ourselves enough time? A lot of times recruitment processes happen so fast where people are like scrambling to do it. It's like we get agitated with the process, but this is a new process for some people, especially to expand the process. It just requires more time. So if when we're asking that question of how do we get more people, how do we help to increase the applicants, I would say, how are you increasing your awareness? How are you increasing their awareness of you and what you have to offer? Because especially when you also have like multi-talented folks who are now in the job force and getting more opportunities, you actually have to be competitive and attract them. So this is again real conversation around recruitment. It's your turn to attract them and make sure that they see you as someone they can like, know, and trust, and actually work for, be safe with, and also succeed with. Like that's a big ask, and I want to make sure that you understand that that's your role now, especially as you're recruiting more and more diverse people. I saw a question pop here in the chat. Um, how to integrate DEI, D&I to change management process, which changing cooperation, cooperative culture and business process at the same time. So, Lamina, I'm going to have to ask you to come up and explain this question to make sure I fully understand. I will, it's going to say allowed to talk. There you go, Brian, got you taken care of. All right. So, can you share what you mean by that question?
Hi, Kimmy. I was with your
And
presentation last week as well, and I'm
yeah, oh yeah,
very
I remember you. Yeah, thank you
yeah.
for being here. Absolutely.
All right, and thank you for all what you're doing. My
Mhm.
question is that if an organization or cooperation in the process of change management and changing the business culture as well and the business process, what will be your best advice to integrate the diversity, equity, and inclusion while the organization is in that process?
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And then we'll drop you back to the participants. So thank you for that. What we will, the beautiful thing is when people are already in a change process, the first thing we want to help them understand is that diversity, equity, inclusion is not just for minorities. As you're going through a change process, we're telling people, and people can acknowledge this, that your company has been, for most companies, have been built by default, or their culture has been built by default. How now that they're in a process of change, they get a chance right now. They get a chance to infuse DEI, to do it by design. So the fact that they're already open to change, the fact that they're already mapping out, it's awesome. That's a great place to be, because then we can help them see that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a pathway to making sure that change is fair for their organization, improves things for more people, and allows more people to have a fair pathway to success in their organization. So I would say if you're in that zone right now, that is a great place to be. And it's important that you are looking at DEI as a tool to help you make that change a more empowering process and a more sustainable process to increase fairness long term for people in your organization. So, or whatever organization you're working with. So thank you for that. Awesome question. And as we keep rolling, this is, yeah, for sure. Thank you too. As we keep rolling, it's I think this also goes back to, are we willing to be transparent? And so one of the questions is, how can we be more transparent in our recruiting process? Well, I think it kind of goes back to acknowledging where your organization is. Acknowledging where your organization is a big piece in acknowledging that. And there's ways to acknowledge it without, so when we talk about being transparent, part of this conversation is also, how are we taking responsibility? And depending on who you're talking to, we've talked to a lot of people, responsibility, I see sometimes people cringe, or like they almost think like it's their fault. So that means they're a bad person. If they're a bad person, they can't be a leader. If they can't be a leader, they have to jump off a cliff. If they jump off a cliff, they're gonna die. If they die, then they can't help. Whew. It's like, all right, that's not what we said, but that's where their minds went. So I love this reframe of responsibility. I think it comes from Tony Robbins that says responsibility is our ability to respond. Responsibility is our ability to respond. When you work with us, like we'll never come in and be like, it's just your fault. Like I don't personally know, especially if I'm only seeing a snapshot of your organization. But I'm not concerned. I'm more concerned what we can do from right here moving forward. That's what I'm most concerned about. That is what I'm most concerned about. So when we're talking about taking responsibility, the fact that you're still in the organization, especially if you're in your leadership role, you have the ability to respond and move the conversation in a different direction. I have not found guilt to be a powerful enough motivator for me. I don't find shame to be a powerful enough motivator for me. I find the idea of improving and making progress to be a huge motivator. I find the joy on the other side, those to be huge motivators. So I challenge folks to be in this place of transparency, understanding that transparency can, again, build more trust. As we build that trust, we actually can move forward together. So that way we're not having to hide things. It's when we hide things and then people find those things out later that there becomes a huge problem. And I will say a huge problem for those who trusted you. There are people right now who do not trust you. There's some people who don't trust us. So they will, no matter what we say, they're going to say negative things. There are ways I'm working to build trust with more folks myself. That's a valid thing. I just listen to their feedback different than the people who currently trust me. I want to make sure that the people who currently trust me, I maintain their trust and I continue to build that. And that's still teaching me how to be transparent and build trust with those who currently do not trust me. So that way we can still be moving the process along. So when we're talking about this in terms of recruiting and being transparent in this process, knowing that even if you are not, for example, visually diverse, right? This is what we started talking about earlier. One, how are you honoring and kind of I would say honoring and amplifying your current levels of other types of diversity in your organization, so people know that you are striving to take care of people, not just skin colors, right? You're here to take care of people. So they, as they come in as a person of a certain skin color, and they might also be a parent, or they might also have other issues going on in their lives, or they might also have other requests that they need. They know that they're going to be taken care of beyond their skin color, because you're hiring and you're creating a culture of inclusion, a culture of true support and belonging. So as you're doing that, part of the progress would be looking at how are we improving our recruitment process. So it's not going to be a one and done conversation. Most companies are only hiring a few people at a time. So this is might take you years to get right, to be honest. I just want to set clear expectations. If you're on cycle number one, hey, we're just launched a recruiting cycle. Okay, all right, we saw that this worked. We were at these events and we started to get more applicants. Awesome. Or we were at these events and we didn't get as many applicants as well. Okay, how do we just focus right there? Because sometimes people go to like diverse events and then they're just sitting there like at the table on their phone, not talking to anybody. Or if we're on Zoom right now, they just roll in and just share some information and they're out. They're not actually having conversations. They're not talking and getting to know people's names, right? That they're there as recruiters, but it's a one-way exchange. So you can literally just be focusing there. And you might say, okay, we got that part down. We have the events. Great. Like, okay, can one part of increasing the awareness would be, are we going to even more events, or are we going to making even greater job posting or different job posting, right? So the point of this is saying, when you're looking at making your recruiting process more equitable, it is a multi-phase process, especially if it has not been, if it has had several barriers to entry in the past. You might be spending most of your time right now removing barriers and improving the fairness of your process even before someone diverse comes through it. I'm just going to say that because this is the real talk. If you have barriers, it's important to find those barriers and start to reduce those barriers. And sometimes it's some of your people, some of your current people, or their mindset around all of this is a barrier. And sometimes it's your policies that are a barrier. It's your interview questions that might be a barrier. We were even looking at how we schedule with people. How if we're only offering one time, as opposed to like when so I know I'll share this in a moment. So are we offering multiple times for people to be able to book things that are, again, are aligned with our lives and our business, but also giving people more opportunities to be a part of the process. So we'll put that there for now. But I think what I was about to say, I guess this goes to answer the question around how do we get more buy-in? I would tell you it starts with treating your current people well. And I just, in full transparency, we talk about that last question was about being transparent. We're in a process where those of you who know Dora, like she's transitioned out, and Dora's a rock star. And so it left on good terms. It was just, something that was more strategic for her life. And what's interesting is, do you have the trust in your organization to where even when someone's transitioning out, they will help you recruit their next replacement? Like, do you have that kind of trust in your organization? Or does someone just give you their 2 weeks notice and they just leave? Or Dora shared a story where another job she was at, one of her coworkers left and they actually deleted things that the company needed because they were not leaving on a positive note. So when she told me that, I was like, even more thank you, Dora, for not doing that. But more importantly, like legitimately, Dora was tasked with and very open about and also supportive in helping us to find the person who would take on her role next. And what's interesting is I interviewed one of the people that she did an interview with and is passing on. And you should see the conversation we had where when I mentioned this to this person, she was like, yeah, that's a huge sign that Dora trusts your organization, you trust her. And that gives me more trust in you all. I was like, yeah, awesome. Because the other person knows that even if someone transitions, like we're not going to be working for a company forever, but are we leaving on good enough terms that where Dora will give us a glowing review to anybody who says, how was it to work for that organization? To the point where she would even help recruit the person who's coming next. Like that's for us, just give you, full transparency for us. That for me is such an awesome sign of what we're really talking about. Is your recruitment process also has a whole lot to do with your inclusion process. And if people actually feel seen and heard, they will help you diversify your pipeline. And if they cannot, right, something that this group that just asked me about, they were like, yeah, we talked to our board about increasing their pipeline and say, like, who do you know? And then the board's like, yeah, we don't know that many people who are diverse. Well, I'll tell you right now, you better focus on training that board. You better focus on training your people. Because if they don't even know people who are diverse, what kind of relationships do they have? What are they forming? Like, how are they being a barrier to diversity in their own lives? And then you're going to ask them to all of a sudden work with some random new person. We focus on recruitment for today, but I'm telling you, it has so much to do with your current inclusion practices to make sure that your internal folks can not only help support your recruitment process, but once people get in there, they help them feel as a part of your company. I see Brian. Yeah, absolutely, Brian. So let me add you to the spotlight and then I'll step out. So go for it, Brian.
Yeah, right on. Thanks, Kemi. So we're talking about within a recruitment process, when you send, I want to rewind a bit. Is it something that I wanted to add to what Kemi shared? I'm thinking about recruitment as a marketing system, not for attracting customers, but for attracting potential employees, potential contractors, people who are going to be doing work on your behalf, people who you're actually bringing into your organization, which in many senses is a lot deeper of a relationship than you would have with your customers, which may or may not be transactional. So my question to you is your relationship with the people embedded in your organization transactional? Right? If your marketing is transactional on the outward facing side to your customers, it's very likely that you might have a similar thing going on internally with your recruitment process. And Kemi was talking about, who is it that you have running your recruitment processes? Who's actually going to recruitment events? Who's making the job postings? Who's conducting the interviews? Because to the extent that that person or the people who are in charge of that process have their own biases when they come face to face with somebody that they perceive to be different from who they perceive themselves to be, that is going to become a barrier to them building trust and a relationship in those initial interactions, right? And so what is likely to happen in cases like that, if you send, let's say you send somebody, you send Josh to a recruitment fair or to a job fair to go and find potential candidates. But if Josh has a hard time being present with people he perceives to be different from himself, or let alone that Josh just has a hard time being present with people, it's likely that the people that Josh is going to bring in are going to be very transactional. They may not connect with Josh. They may not relate to you and your company. They may not experience a human vibe from Josh as a representative of your organization. And they still might be interested in the job because for them, it's going to be, well, I need the paycheck, or I'm just looking for a job, or maybe, I can get over Josh and maybe they're going to be some other nice people. But likely if Josh is your representative and he doesn't have the ability to be present with people, no matter who they show up as, then you're going to have some difficulties bringing enthusiastic and passionate people who connect to your cause into your organization. And likely if Josh, who is embedded in your organization, continues to not be able to be present with people, it's likely that you as the leader also have a hard time being present with people, or Josh would have somebody that he can look up to inside the organization to model the behavior of being present with people. And so if you as the leader, or if your board or your executives, whomever is responsible for carrying out or setting the example of what the culture is in the company, has internal subconscious barriers to being with those they perceive to be different from themselves. Notice I'm not saying those who are different from them. I'm saying those that they perceive to be different, right? Because if you're talking about something like gender, you don't know, you actually don't know what somebody's orientation is in that way, unless you have that rapport and trust with them to have that conversation. But in most companies and organizations, it's a don't ask, don't tell policy around gender, right? And so you have people feeling like they can't be themselves. Right. And so if that's the leadership's perspective, if that's Josh's perspective as the recruiter showing up to an event, Josh doesn't know if he's meeting a transgender candidate. Josh might say some things, or Josh just might not be present with that person in such a way that he has them feeling safe and comfortable. And so Josh is going to end up attracting more people just like Josh. And then you get an organization filled with Joshes. No offense to Joshes who are here on the call. I know there's a couple of you. What I'm saying is,
use
right,
your own name next time. You got to say Bryans. You talk about the Bryans.
Brian would never do such a thing.
Well, I think that, sorry, go.
Yeah, so my point is, it starts with you setting an example for the behavior that you want others to model. If you are going to champion the cause of diversity, equity, and inclusion in your organization, in championing that cause, you have to have the skills and the personal awareness, the ability to be present with yourself and with people, no matter what comes up, such that you demonstrate that and others can model it by your example and then carry it out into the world and attract more people like who you are and what you believe in as an organization, right? That's how deep this recruitment conversation goes. We're not just talking about, oh, where do I post jobs to find more diverse candidates? Although that is an entry point into this conversation. When we work with our clients, these are the conversations we're really having, and the kinds of trainings that we put together are very deep, personalized self-awareness trainings, in addition to strategy trainings and different kinds of skill sets that are more hard skills. And when we can combine these as human beings, we can become more well-rounded people that can attract more of the same.
Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate that. And y'all can see why I get a kick out of working with Brian. I mean, it's been an amazing process. And we started today, actually. We had a strategy meeting ourselves, and I told him I got a message from somebody who says, thank you for creating a space for me to become more of me. And I just shared with him, like, that message really was powerful. Thank you for creating a space for me to be more of me. And I was like, Brian, thank you for doing that in our own business like that. Somebody gave me that feedback, but I wanted to share it with Brian because I felt the same. And that's what we get a chance to do with more organizations is help you create a space, especially if you're the leader, for you as a leader to be more of yourself, for your team to be more themselves. So as you recruit more folks, that you're creating a sense where people can show up and belong, and that they belong in honor of their diversity. And and this is really, answering that question of um, choosing between, so this is one of the most frustrating questions for me is like, how do I choose between top talent and diversity? And really what that question says to me is a person is assuming that diverse people are not as top talent as whoever they have been hiring in the past. Is if you're asking that question, this is part of what Brian was saying, like, how do we get you to personally know more diverse candidates who are top talent? Because you may not even know that those folks exist and your view of the world might be a certain way. So it's important that as we are creating a space for more people to be who they are, we are acknowledging that people might be greater than we've ever given them a chance to be. So we're having this conversation about recruitment. I appreciate that we're doing a deep dive. Thank y'all for going along with us. Our goal is to answer some of the top questions, some of the hard questions that we get, and really appreciate people being willing to ask. Um, we've said in a couple of different times, we quote John Gordon that says, when there's a lack of communication, negativity fills the space. So that's why we're having these Q&As, because I think if you don't get a chance to ask these questions, then negativity just kind of fills the space and we keep on letting biases run our lives. And so as Brian already said, what we do when we work with clients is we also look at the biases that have been in the processes, but also in our minds, and strategically remove them, and help you to instead of we basically break it down as building blocks of bias. And so instead of building a prison of shame and blame, we actually build a pathway to relationships and show you that that is how you shift biases. You actually got to have new evidence, you got to have new relationships, you have to engage instead of guess in order to actually create new pathways in your mind towards something better. And as we transition to close out this time, right, the question we get all the time is, Cami, can you help us with essentially auditing or assessing our recruitment process? We say, absolutely. Well, I've just been telling you stories. We're helping groups do this all the time. So if you would like our help, Brian's going to put a link in the chat to what's called the Right Fit Call. So it's a 30-minute call you can jump on with me, and we can chat about what would be most helpful in terms of working through your recruitment process to make sure that it is fair, it is accessible, it is also a safe and healthy process for you, as well as the candidates you're seeking to bring through. And for those of you who have been tracking along, you know that we're also, these are some of the same tools and trainings that we are offering to the clients in our coaching program. So we are launching a group coaching program, and tomorrow is the last day to register. Tomorrow is the 18th. If you're watching this at a different time, tomorrow is the 18th. Thursday, the 18th is the last day to register. So that if you, Brian can put a link to that in the chat as well. If you have any questions about that, you're welcome to jump on that Right Fit call as well, for those of you who are seeking to learn more about the group coaching program, because our goal is to really create diversity, equity, inclusion as an operating system. Right now, people are like piecing it together. It's crazy what people are doing out there. And it's like, whoa, you're going to piece together something that impacts people on a day-to-day basis, and you're just going to kind of like wing it. That's not how I like to operate. I can wing it in the kitchen. That's fine. If I make a meal that's not good, I'll just, stomach it or start over. But I'm telling you, don't wing it. Don't wing it with DEI. Don't wing it with DEI. If you're done with that, done winging it, we'd love to teach you our DEI operating system. And again, all you have to do is jump on a Right Fit call, and we can start that process and help you out in the best ways possible. Especially if you want to start with recruiting, we'll help you there as well. So thank you all for the time, and then for the powerful questions, and wow. It's been hot in this room as we talk about things like recruitment, but it's so intense. And instead of it allowing it to stay intense, we have to be intentional about what we do to shift it. So thank y'all. We'll talk soon. Bye.